One of my favorite stories in our book has to do with some of the most fearless and tenacious freedom fighters that you'll find anywhere in our country. These are people who you would not want to meet in a dark alley if you were trying to hijack someone's civil liberties. And of course, I could be speaking about no one else than our nation's librarians. Amy and I traveled to Connecticut to meet 4 librarians who have had quite an impact in the actions that they took. And if anyone embodies the notion of people who were not looking for trouble, have never been in trouble, it would be these 4 librarians. Around Hartford, the capital of Connecticut, are 27 libraries who's decided to link together their computer system and to put their heads together. And so when people go to the public library to surf the net and do email, which is a big use that the library offers, a big service the libraries offer nowadays. So anyway, their computer systems are all linked together and run by a small cooperative organization called the Library Connection. Well, one day, George Christian, the executive director of the Library Connection, has a small professional staff and volunteer librarians who manage this operation. So one day, George Christian is sitting in his office when there's a knock at the front door. There's 2 gentlemen there who want to see the boss. And these 2 men identify themselves as special agents from the FBI Hartford office. They have a letter for him, but this is no ordinary letter. It is called a National Security Letter, or NSL. And upon opening it, it's like Superman opening kryptonite or getting handed a radioactive rock. Because the moment you open this letter and read its contents, you are immediately bound to do what it tells you and gagged from speaking to anybody else. And so the agents direct him to read the letter in their presence. It's very short. It informs him that the FBI wants information on every single person who's used the library computer system in all 27 libraries on a particular day that was 4 months before. It offers no particular reason other than that the FBI is seeking this information in a national security case. It informs him that he must comply with this order. He must not tell anyone that the FBI is investigating him, and should he break this gag order, he will be subject to 5 years in prison. And they have him read that line about "you cannot tell anyone," pointing to each word the way a children's librarian might point, underline, while reading at story hour. He looks at this, and he looks at these early agents in front of him, and he says, "I believe this is unconstitutional, and I'm not going to give you anything that you're asking for." So the agents look at him in the way that a predator kind of looks at its prey just before tearing it to pieces, that kind of pitying, head-shaking way, and they say, "Will you get back to us just as quickly as possible then?" And they leave him with a business card. So after playing Superman for a few minutes there, George shrinks back in his office, collapses into his chair, and wonders what on earth he is going to do. He doesn't even know if he can call a lawyer from the way this thing is worded. It says, "You cannot tell anybody." And of course, that ambiguity is exactly what the government intends. It's this all-powerful, omniscient sense. We are watching, we are controlling. And so George decides, well, he can't fight this alone. The only people who can take on the full might of the national security state, it'll take at least 4 librarians to do that. And so he calls the executive committee of the Library Connection, which is 3 other librarians who volunteer for this job, one of whom told us how he came to be on the executive committee. Peter Chase, the very polite, mild-mannered director of the Plainville Public Library in Connecticut, tells us, I'm very busy with my library, and I got this call from one of my colleagues. They said, Peter, please won't you be on the Library Connection Board for the next year. We're going to give you a fancy title. We're going to call you Vice President. It'll be really easy. 2 weeks later, Peter Chase is in a pitched battle of national implications, gagged from speaking to anyone in his community or in his family, and the fight is on. So George Christian calls this emergency meeting of the executive board. This has never happened in the history of this organization before. Peter and these librarians, and it's a very cryptic message. We must meet immediately tomorrow morning. I can't tell you what it's about. It's an emergency. So Peter Chase is driving there and thinking, what could this be? Overdue books? An adult book that was filed mistakenly in the children's section? I mean, he's rifling through everything a librarian would normally worry about. They arrive at this meeting, and George Christian pulls out this letter, and once again, by opening it, everybody in the room is exposed, and they're all bound to it and gagged. Their little nonprofit lawyer, who does pro bono work for the librarians, gets up and basically flees the meeting, realizing she is in way, way over her head, and recommends that they call the ACLU. So they do, and the ACLU National Office decides to handle the case because, as it turns out, our nation's mild-mannered librarians have actually been itching for a fight to take on the Patriot Act. They knew they were going to take it up somewhere. They just didn't know exactly where. And certainly these librarians in Connecticut didn't know. So let me pick it up with what happens next. These national security letters, incidentally, are part of the Patriot Act, if I didn't make that clear. Few Americans understand how draconian the Patriot Act is unless it reaches out and touches them. When the 4 Connecticut librarians received a national security letter, they were shocked to learn that it stripped away civil rights that they thought were inviolable. "Where's the court order?" Chase asked George Christian. "There is none," replied Christian. "They said they didn't need one because they had an NSL. The librarians were being ordered to turn over records on their patrons simply because an FBI agent told them to." This is the equivalent of a corner cop being able to issue you an order on his own decision that you just have to comply with and you can't tell anybody out. An FBI agent is simply the federal version of the corner cop. Alice Knapp, president of the Connecticut Library Association, said, "All of us as law-abiding citizens understand that when there's a subpoena and there's judicial oversight of the process in the course of an investigation, library records may be subpoenaed. But what is of the utmost concern to people is the lack of oversight in the Patriot Act, and that it can be used for a fishing expedition. As Peter Chase explained to us, for us this is a very important principle. A court order protects you because you have a neutral third party, the court, and you must convince them that a crime has been committed. People come to us and say very confidential things to our reference librarians. They have medical issues, personal matters. What people are borrowing at a public library is nobody's business. It turns out that for librarians, safeguarding the privacy of their patrons is a sacred trust. And for Connecticut's mild-mannered librarians, there was no hesitation about how they would respond to this attack on the privacy of their patrons. They would fight like hell.